Hello, my sweet little search results. For the first time in over a decade, I paid someone to cut my hair. So I'm going to grace you with the radiance of a Leo while I sink my claws into some grade A garbage I saw on the interwebs. For today's topic, I'm going to shout out to humanity for having a terrible take on everything that has to do with humans. And the topic is it okay to use Google as a software engineer? The short answer is yes. Leverage the universe, bend all resources to create impact. And if that means using Google, have at it. The long answer is a little more complicated. First, let's talk about quality of engineering resources. So engineering resources come from a few things. The first is reason. This is the genesis of knowledge, and it creates both memory and reference. It is slow, it is deliberate, it takes a lot of time, but it is very accurate, and it is the truth that everything else is built on. The next is memory. It's fast, but it's unreliable, and it's based on repetitions, things you're doing in everyday life, and how you prioritize these things. Now, the third one is reference. It's essentially taking everything from reason and memory and combining them into a very concrete and reliable distilled reference that is fast to access. Now, when we're talking about references, we have a couple different types. We have what I would call primary references. Primary reference would be something like source code. Source code never lies. You should always work as close to source code as possible when you're looking for references. The next is documentation. It usually doesn't lie, but it is often incomplete. The third one is the author. The author knows all, but somehow manages to forget even more, and will usually tell you to look at the source code. Source code. Now we're going to go on to what I would call secondary references. And we have converging quality references. So these are references where the internet can and will correct mistakes in these references over time and will eventually converge to a high quality reference. However, it is constantly eroding. It is constantly battling changes in the problem space. So some example of these things could be things like GitHub issues or Stack Overflow, which are usually known problems or mistakes. There's also things like replies to Twitter shitposts. This is a very real thing where people smarter than you, sometimes the author, does that make it a primary source, comes in to prove you wrong, but it is to your benefit. And then, of course, you have resources like Medium, YouTube, etc., where commenters, like yourself, are keeping folks honest for the most part. Then we have what I'll call static quality references. I wish I had a better name for this, but these are things the internet cannot comment on, cannot correct mistakes in. And this could be something like ChatGPT. It's remarkably decent, but it's very confident in bad answers and nobody can tell it to get bent. So where does Google fit into all of these references? Well, Google is not reference material. It is a router to all these references. It gets you to these references. So I have a hard time understanding why Google is bad. There's nothing wrong with Google. If I'm looking for source code, I can use Google to route me to the source code. So how could Google be bad? It doesn't really make sense. So I think the core argument of whether Google is bad or not, I think at its core is fundamentally flawed because Google is just a messenger for everything else. But I do want to talk about some of the pro arguments and anti-arguments about Google. So the pro argument for Google is essentially our world moves so fast that there's no benefit to committing everything to memory. And I just want to touch on this real quick. One time I was in Silicon Valley visiting, and a non-technical person was talking to me, and I told them I was a software engineer. And they said, "Wow, that's amazing." And I said, "Why is that amazing?" And they said, because to them, software engineering seemed like trying to work on a car where all of the tools that you use to work on the car are constantly changing in your hands, in your toolbox, and all the parts on the car are constantly reconfiguring themselves and changing themselves like some sort of Enigma machine. And I think that's a really, really good way of looking at software engineering, which is why we often have to rely on these resources that are also constantly changing. The other pro argument to Googling is some engineers have messy jobs with messy tasks that require messy referencing. So if you don't have the benefit of working in an organization where all of your tools are internally built and you can fire up a one-on-one with the genius who built this thing and get all of your questions answered in 15 minutes, then you might have to resort to trying to find some of these publicly available resources. Now, the anti-Google argument is something that I would actually call more like anti-help. And that is that you should challenge yourself to figure something out before relying on others. I think that I think it's good to challenge yourself to learn and to challenge yourself to, think past the surface of the problem to try to figure it out. We should all be doing that, but we should not be afraid to ask for help, and we should not be afraid to Google. So be careful with this one. Now, I believe that in all these conversations, the messy middle is usually where you can find the truth. And the truth is that we have to find balance. So there's a lot of human elements that are involved in this. There's some technical elements as well. But I think there's something that we have to remember. It's really important. People are not machines. We all have our own way of moving through this world. We all have different priorities and strengths, and what works for me may not work for you. All I can do is share what works for me, and then you can decide how much of that is important to you. The other thing is that, like I said earlier, it's important to challenge yourself to learn, and also learn as close to needing something as possible. And what I mean by that is, if you're going to need something in a week, it's great to learn it now because it will be fresh in your memory. It's not something that you have been carrying around for a while and has degraded over time, and then you can apply it immediately. So learn something, apply it, and then move on. The other thing is that software is a moving target. Live updating references, like I said earlier, save everyone time, use them and contribute to them because if you contribute, then the quality will converge to excellent quality for everybody involved, and it makes everybody's life easier. Use references that are as close to the source code as possible. If somebody gives you a hard time about how you're doing something, they can pound sand. And the reason is because when money is on the table, the only thing that matters is your net impact. People who care more about impact than processes or how people are doing things are the ones who will eventually sign the paychecks. So, thank you very much. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and I will see you around.